Welcome to Vlogs of History After Hours. I'm your host, Darius Coslin, and if you aren't familiar with my show or what I'm all about, I do encourage you to check out my main show called Vlogs of History After Hours. It comes out every single Monday. It's a show about history, and every week we take a look at a different subject. So this week we've taken a look at the Rwandan Genocide, one of the fastest growing genocides in history. And what I want to mention and talk about in this Vlogs of History After Hours episode is essentially the lack of international intervention in the genocide. Because as I mentioned in the main show, nobody really did anything to help the Rwandan people. Nobody did anything to help the Tutsis. They were slaughtered, they were murdered brutally, and the international scene, they didn't do anything. So what I want to explore is why nobody acted. Why did nobody help the Rwandan people? Well, for one, from the United States perspective, well, there wasn't any economic interest in actually intervening in Rwanda. I mean, they had no oil, they had no gold, they had no resources to offer the United States. And from an economic point of view, well, there just was nothing to gain. There was only things to lose. Because if you intervene in a genocide, you're going to lose troops, you're going to lose men. And they didn't want to lose that without a hope of getting something in return. And so they just sat on the sidelines, didn't do anything. In fact, the United States, they didn't want to call what was happening in Rwanda a genocide, because if they called it a genocide, it would mean that they had to intervene, because you can't call something a genocide and not intervene. It's just not something that you do. The closest that they got was on the 25th of May. They called the events of what was happening in Rwanda, they called them acts of genocide. But I mean, you have to decide. It's either a genocide or it's not. It can be acts of genocide. Europe on the other hand, well, basically, they were focused on Yugoslavia. They had their own things, and they didn't really notice that much what was happening in Rwanda. But Belgium had some troops in Rwanda, troops which were originally killed by the Hutus, which were the ones, by the way, who were doing the mass killings, the genocides, the Hutu extremists. They killed 10 Belgian soldiers they were tasked with protecting a person of interest in Rwanda, and they were killed. And the Belgians, when having their own troops, 10 of their own troops killed, well, they kind of wanted to take their troops out because they were afraid that more troops were going to be killed, and they were reluctant to send more troops to Rwanda because, well, no, they didn't want their troops to die. But they omitted to think about all of the Rwandans who died, all of the Rwandans who were brutally murdered and killed with machetes and whatnot. Now, the Africans, well, the other countries in Africa, either they were fighting their own civil war, which is understandable, or they just didn't know about the Rwandan genocide, because remember, Africa isn't very developed. They may not have heard, not every country may have heard of what was happening in Rwanda, or they just didn't have enough resources, because Africa is a very poor continent. So nobody helped. Nobody really came to help. There was no economic interest. The Rwandans were left to themselves. The Rwandans were left, well, to just not do anything. They did, however, have some help from the UN, the United Nations. But the help that they had wasn't that much, because the United Nations did not send them enough troops to actually have an impact in preventing the genocide. Before the genocide took place, the United Nations had about 2,500 men in Rwanda. And 15 days after the genocide, on about I think it was the 21st of April, 1994, they removed about 90% of their whole troops, leaving only 270 troops to fight the genocide. But in a country as Rwanda, well, 270 troops, 270 men aren't enough to actually prevent a genocide. It's far from enough. Wouldn't you agree? I certainly agree. And plus, they weren't even allowed to use their weapons. They were only allowed to use their weapons in self-defense, which makes sense, but at the same time doesn't make sense, because people were being killed brutally, and if you saw a Tutsi being killed by a Hutu, you legally had no power. You had no right to intervene in any way. Only if the Hutu would attack you. And the thing is, the Hutus were afraid of the UN. The Hutus were not attacking the UN as much as they were attacking the Rwandans. And so the UN just stayed there with their 270 troops. In fact, the leader of the UN mission in Rwanda was called Romeo Dallaire. And he asked for more troops. He constantly was asking, give us more troops. We need more troops. We can't do with the troops that we have now. It's impossible. And the UN didn't send him or the country any troops. They did, however, make a plan to send about 5,000 troops. But by the time the troops actually got there, like I mentioned in the Vlogs of History episode, it was already too late. The genocide was over by a long time. And those troops, well, they just helped in rebuilding Rwanda and just doing a lot of damage control after the fact had been done. And that's sad because Romeo, well, he basically now suffers from post-traumatic stress disorder because of the horrible events that happened in Rwanda. He's now prescribed a lifetime of medication for the events that happened. And now you see all of these repercussions of the international countries not doing anything to help Rwanda. Because we are talking about, remember, about one of the fastest genocides in history. 1 million or 800,000, it is estimated, there's not an exact number, but around 800,000 people were killed during the Rwandan disaster in as little as 100 days. In 100 days, that's 8,000 people a day being killed. 8,000 people a day, that's a lot, and nobody did anything to help, nobody did anything to intervene or stop. And I wanted to share this with you in this Vlogs of History After Hours episode because I try to, in the main episode, to not give my opinion. I just try to present the facts in a neutral and unbiased way as much as possible. But here I want to take the liberty to actually express my opinion and express my disappointment in the international community, in the international countries, of not having done anything to actually prevent this Rwandan genocide. We could have done a lot more than we did. It's not a question of could we have done something? No, we could have done something. I'm 100% sure we could have done something. It's just that we chose not to do it because of economic factors, because of wanting to save our own people and not thinking about the people who actually needed help the most. Because I don't think the United States needed that much help compared to the Rwandans who were being killed. They were fearing for their lives every single day. 8,000 people a day being killed. So I hope that maybe we can somehow not do this thing again, maybe learn from our mistakes, learn from our inaction, the mistake of our inaction, because not doing something is doing something in itself, is making a mistake. And I hope that we can learn from that and hopefully, possibly not repeat such a thing in the future. Hopefully, if there's another genocide, which I hope there won't be, but hopefully we can do something to prevent it, at least show some more effort from our parts, from the international community. So with that being said, I really do hope that you've enjoyed this video. I hope that you've enjoyed this Vlogs of History episode this week. If you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check that out. I'll leave a link right here. Make sure you do. It's going to give you a lot of background information on the Rwandan genocide, what happened, and how everything started and how everything finished. So I do encourage you to check that out. As always, I'm your host, Darius Cousin. It's been an absolute pleasure, and I will see you all next week.